Now, earlier this week, I put up a pair of related videos on the topic of shipping policies and shipping procedures, how to set them up and use them to help your reselling business be more efficient, make a little more money, or keep more money in your pocket. On one of those videos, I got a comment from a viewer. He asked me if I'd go into the related topic of printing shipping labels and printers, and I decided today I would do that. Medaka Jedi. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but his question was a good one. You're not going to fail at business if you buy the wrong printer. You're not going to succeed if you buy the right. But in those margins where we look at cost and efficiency, economy, speed of doing a process, printers play a role. Now, the history of printers, of course, goes way back, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But we're always asked the question, what's the best printer? Well, the answer is, of course, it depends. There's no particular brand I endorse. I'm not getting paid by anyone. I happen to use a pair of Rollo printers, and I chose them back, a few years ago for a couple of reasons. One was they're small, they're compact, they had a pretty good reputation, and there were enough of them out on the used market that I could look at refurbished units, used units, because I wasn't really sure that I was going to like setting up yet another dedicated printer. In the past, our office, our home, we've had LaserJet printers, we've had inkjet printers, we've had colored printers, we've had printers that are black and white. Now, some of those multifunction LaserJets, they're huge. They are physically large. They're the size of a kitchen sink. And I have two of those, and they pretty much, one sits in the office, one stays on the cart. Now, back when I first decided to invest in a dedicated label printer, there were two predominantly leading brands. One was Rollo, the other was Dymo. Physically, they look a little different. Dymo's kind of circular in nature. Typically, people load round rolls into it or feed the rolls from the back. The other was small, cubicle, more basic looking, and it was a Rollo. The original choices didn't include wired or wireless. Basically, you needed a cord to run from your device in order to enable the printer to print labels on demand. But the whole label on demand thing is interesting as well, because not everybody does it. Not all e-commerce platform sellers use printers. Some small sellers still take their items to the post office, set it up on the counter after standing in line, pay the counter rates to the post office in order to get labels to send their packages on their way. It works. It's not efficient. It's not the least expensive. But if you're in a situation, maybe your printer's broken, or you don't want to invest in a printer because you're more mobile, you can do it that way. Just as you can hand write your labels. If you go back far enough, we hand wrote our packages, and we then took them up to the post office to get postage. But along came sites like stamps.com and mailboxes, etc., and they began providing alternatives to the post office. And they'd give you an app, they'd give you a software piece that you'd load in your desktop or your laptop, and you could print your labels at home. It was a big improvement. So the post office started giving discounted rates if you did the work yourself and stayed out of their line. It's still that way today. There's really no reason anymore to take those packages to the post office. Why? The price of printers and ink and labels have come down. You can buy a good name brand refurbished printer these days for well under $100. You can buy new ones for under $200. As you shop around for a printer, though, my view on printers is simple. Get one that's efficient, get one that isn't proprietary, get one that will do the job with a minimum hassle, connection, hookup, and will give you some chance at long life cycle management. What do I mean by that? Well, often when dealing with an accessory like a printer, you can get a pretty inexpensive printer, but then you find out that the toner cartridges or the ink is the expensive feature. You can buy an inkjet for $100, but you can easily drop $100 in a few months printing labels. Same is true of laser cartridges. They last a lot longer. They'll print very nice paper. You can get them in black and white. The multifunction units can also double as a copier. Again, they're inexpensive relatively, but they're not dedicated label printers. So if you're going to print 4x6 labels on those machines, you're constantly changing the settings and changing out the paper trays, the actual feeds. So I like to have a dedicated label printer. In fact, like I said, we have two of them because the inconvenience of unhooking the one at the packing bench and taking it in after we've run an auction led me to purchase a second one. And the other reason I purchased the second one is because I decided I really liked that Rollo. So even though they'd come out with newer models, like wireless models, I went online and I bought a second used, pre-owned Rollo printer. And that way, if the first one failed, I didn't have to shift back to using a laser printer, cutting out the labels and taping them on. Nothing wrong with that, but it is a time consumer. But that all depends on the volume you're selling. If you're not making a lot of sales each week, the idea of printing out a few labels on a different printer, cutting them out and taping them on, nothing wrong with it. If you can see your way to budgeting for a dedicated label printer, and then you can couple it with something like curbside pickup, you've actually got a much more efficient system. Your cost per label print will go down, and the time you spend running packages into town will virtually disappear. My packages go no further than the edge of that green carport right there behind me. And I can print my labels anytime, day or night, fitting my schedule. I don't have to get to the post office during its hours of operations, or in Q4 especially, stand in line waiting my turn to buy a label. You can handwrite labels. I don't recommend it because it increases the error rate, especially when you're doing a bunch of them. And we've noticed that when we run our Auction Ninja sales, because the Auction Ninja platform does not have a real good shipping interface into either Pirate Ship or the post office. So Rose has to print out something or look at a screen for the Auction Ninja buyers, and then she has to transpose and hand type those addresses in, which requires, of course, double checking the typing. Make sure that the street names are right and the people's names are right. And that's where a good shipping interface comes in handy. And eBay has a pretty decent one. Pirate Ship has a decent one. In fact, it'll import your sales right from platforms like eBay. And then the data is pulled in as the buyer put it into his account. You don't have to worry about misspellings or bad zip codes because the buyer provided that information, and to some extent the buyer is responsible for that information. So if you get a bounced package, a return to sender, which is a great topic for another video, I still have some in my office that I haven't opened yet. But if you get a bounce package and it's due to the fact that the buyer had an incorrect address in his system, in his account, then you're not responsible. That lost postage is on him, not you. Where if you're hand typing and you make the mistake and you say drive instead of street and the town happens to have both and it goes to the wrong place and bounces because the resident doesn't live there, that's on you. And that postage is going to have to be absorbed by you and your business, and you're going to have to resend it. And you may very well get a negative from that because it's taken twice as long for the process to get the item to the buyer. And we all know buyers like to receive their items quickly. As I use up my old labels, and I've got some that I probably bought 6-8 months ago because I bought them in serious quantity, but as I use them up and it's the winter months and they've been stored out in the cold garage, they don't always stick to the boxes very well. So when that happens, I put the labels on and then I tape them. Now I'm not doing that to protect the labels so much as simply to keep them physically attached. But if you're printing your labels with a laser or an inkjet, the key word to that is ink. These thermals, they're not using ink, they're using a heat process. And that means if the package is left on somebody's porch or out in the rain, you got a lot less chance that the rain or the snow will obscure the addressing information in transit. So the labels are better protected from the weather, whether you tape them or not. I put the tape on simply for a mechanical connection. You know, back when I started this business, I took my packages to the post office. Then they opened something like it wasn't a mailboxes, etc., but it was similar. So I had an alternative. And it gave me a place to take packages bound for FedEx or UPS. And I still have one of those in my town. We don't have dedicated offices for FedEx and UPS. We'd have to drive a few towns over to find each of those. So they go to a franchise operation. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that when you drop them off there, even if they scan them at the counter, you have to ask, because that scan they're doing at the franchise probably is not interlaced with the FedEx or UPS carrier or the post office, which means tracking won't really start until their driver comes by, FedEx, UPS, comes by, picks up the items, and he scans them into the system. Because scanning is probably one of the most important critical factors about shipping out packages. The scan starts the clock. It shows the buyer that you have actually started the process of moving that item towards him. I saw a comment the other day because I was shopping for something. And when I shop on eBay, I like to look at the feedback scores among the competitors. The best price and the best features seemed to be with a guy who did not have a 100% feedback. He had like a 98, which in reality, any scoring system in the world where you got a 98, that's pretty good. I mean, in all honesty. Some of his competition who was asking for more, they had 100. So I look at things in those situations. Return, the condition, how good the photos are. And in this case, the feedback scores. And I looked down through there and he had 2 negative feedbacks. And in one of those feedbacks, his buyer, on a different product he sold, made a comment about the seller had no urgency. He did not feel, because the seller waited 2 days to take that package to the post office and start that scanning process, that he did not feel his seller valued him. Now I took a look at that, and I actually went into his store, and I noticed he had 2-day handling time on his items. So in fact, the seller was complying with his own stated rules and policies, but the buyer still saw that as a delay, causing the shipping to be late in his mind, and he was upset and gave the guy feedback. That's where efficiency comes in. The idea is to be able to get your packages from the sold list to the shipped list, scanned and on their way in as short a time as practical. Now, does that mean 1 day? No. I've never shipped out in 1 day. In fact, I have my stores set to 3-day handling. But I normally ship either the afternoon that the sale came in or the next morning. And that way I'm exceeding my buyers' expectations. Under promise and over deliver. That's the way I run my operation. And having printers that can efficiently print and having an alternate standby of the same model also help me be efficient, help me keep costs down. Because every time you can keep down a cost of a process that you do day in and day out, you are improving your bottom line. My history with packing and shipping, printing labels, goes back to when I was a teenager working in a big old warehouse where you pulled the lever and the tape came out and moistened, and you put the tape on the box, and then you actually had another machine and you dialed in the weight and what you were going to pay for in shipping, and you pulled a lever and a little paper label came out, and they had an actual an account with the post office. So in the center of that label was their registration number, and all the printing, all the label costs got charged off to their account at the post office. And we were very specific about what the fees were. Well, now, of course, the post office uses some ranges. If you're shipping media, the first pound, same rate. Then it goes up by the pound. Ground Advantage starts off with 4-ounce increments till it hits a pound, and then it goes in 1-pound rates. So a lot of people I see on these videos, they're fussing with whether the package weighs 1.2 ounces or 1.3 ounces. The reality is it doesn't matter, because if your shipping table, which you can find online at the post office, jumps by the pound, why are you fussing with 1.6, 1.7? Just simply put in 2. And be done with it. And that's one of the reasons people can estimate shipping. If you put the item on the scale and the item weighs 1.2, and you've got a box there, whether it's folded up or not, and you set that on the scale and it jumps you up another 5 ounces, well, you know that the tape and the label and a little bit of crumple is going to put you well under the next pound increment. This is not rocket science. It's complicated, but it's not rocket science. What makes it complicated? Well, all the different carriers and all the different rates and all the different sizes and weights and tables. The system has been made complicated. The actual idea of packing up an item safely and putting it in a box or in a poly mailer and printing a label, that concept is straightforward and simple. It's the charges that make it expensive, trying to save a little bit of money on each package to help your bottom line. Now, where do I actually spend my focus when I'm talking about weights like that? Well, I do when I'm tipping right up against one of those increments. If the package is, say, 15.9 ounces, and I haven't taped it, well, I take a look at, do I really need as much crumple paper as I put in? Can I trim a few flaps to make sure that when I attach the label, I'm underneath? Now, here's an example of something I talk about regularly. There are the pair of cars. There's the box I've chosen. I've already trimmed it down. You can see here to shorten the height, but it's sitting really close to 8 ounces. If the tape and the label send it over 8 ounces, then I'm going to have to pay for 12 ounces of shipping. And since this was a low value, low price point sale, I need to get everything I can back from it. So we're going to do a little trimming. We're going to shorten some of these flaps, pick back up an ounce or two to make sure that we can ship it at 8 ounces. So flaps have been cut. She's down to 7.7. We throw a dummy label on there. It's still hovering at 7778. And if that had gone over 8 ounces at all, the shipping for 8 ounces is $4.62. The shipping for 8 point anything jumps us to $5.49, taking almost an additional $1. I charged $5.79, so now I make about $1.20 to offset those eBay final value fees and what I paid for the box and packaging. All right, so you see how that works. So I always like to check the weight just before I close up the box. If it's well over and you know you can't trim that much off, that's one thing. But I always hate it when it comes in like 8.01 or something. And I'll do some mock-up sometimes for that. I'll actually have a flat pack box, like a 6x5x5, and I have some labels torn off my Rollo printer that they're just blanks. And I'll throw a box, and I'll throw a label, and I'll throw the item on the scale, and I'll see just how close I am pushing that limit. And if it looks like it's going over, I just kind of cringe a little, bite the bullet, and pay for the next step increment. You're losing money if you spend too much time with each package. And if I lose a little money on today's package, I'll probably make a little money on tomorrow's package because I use flat rate shipping. I actually look at the item, its weight, think about how far it's likely to have to be shipped, and I put in one number rather than using calculated. Because personally, I think the eBay calculated shipping is a little too expensive to the buyer. I think using it prices me out of the market in many instances, and I can ship cheaper because I'm keeping my costs down on the packing material. I can ship cheaper by watching the different carriers and the different rates, and maybe using media when I can, maybe going with FedEx if it's much cheaper than USPS, and I can keep my costs down. And that means I can offer my items to buyers, saving them a little money. And if I can beat out my competition by lowering my shipping and packing costs, that's a win for me. It's a win for the buyer. And eBay gets the sale. So I guess in a sense, it's even a win for eBay. So as I was saying, I learned to pack and ship back when I was a teenager working in a warehouse. It's come a long way since then. You know, we started out, we would be hand addressing packages, and the next thing you know, companies like mailboxes, etc., and stamps.com created software apps that could be loaded on our laptop, and we would be billed per label. Then, of course, the post office started saying, well, if you simply go onto the postal website and you print your labels at home, you can get a discount as well, because the labor for that portion of the work has shifted to your home or business as opposed to the post office counter, which slows down the process of getting people who do have to go to the counter up and processed. Where should you go to print your labels? It's a common question. I print most of my labels on eBay. Why? Because it's right there. I've put in my specifics when I make my template as to what carrier I probably will use unless I pick standard, and what method I'm likely to use and what I think it's going to cost me, and I put in those flat rate. Now the equivalent, of course, is to weigh and measure and put those actual weights and measures in, and in the last video we talked about some of that when Rose was trying to run sales and how weighing and measuring or not weighing and measuring will actually affect your ability to run sales from the shipping side of getting those out, buy one, get one free, that type of thing. These are all interlaced activities, so one can have an impact on another. Another reason this is a complicated topic. Today we're going to talk about shipping labels. This is a book that sold last night. Came from my free book source. List price $8.79. It sold. I also had $5.79 media mail on the original listing, but I chose this one to use as an example today because often with these smaller media items, they don't weigh a pound or more. So even though they went up on the listing as media, I do sometimes upgrade them to Ground Advantage. And this is one of the choices you as a seller will have to make. Most other items we have, they go out Ground Advantage. Almost everything other than media these days is shipped USPS Ground Advantage if it weighs under 3 pounds and fits in a box that is smaller than 12 by 12 by 12. Let's look at the shipping page. Now this is the eBay shipping page. There you can see the book. Here you can see the choice of where you put in your size and weight. And you'll notice that I've already put it in. The book weighs 12 ounces when packed. Dimensions of the padded mailer are 11 by 10 by 2. Here is the actual book once packed. This one I wrapped in bubble rather than corrugated because, let's face it, the price point of the book sale didn't really justify the additional work of adding a layer. And as it is, it has 2 layers of protection in a standard eBay padded envelope. We've put in the size and the weight. The original listing, media. Buyer paid $5.79 in shipping. Now let's punch some numbers in here. We'll hit return, and you can see that at the media rate, which is what the buyer selected because it was the only choice in the listing, and this goes back to the previous videos on setting up your shipping plans and policies. So we intended to ship this media or better. Ground Advantage is the next choice. $4.47. Now this buyer is in Portland. For media, it doesn't really matter. Media, it's one rate pretty much anywhere in the country. But if we're considering upgrading this, Oregon will come into play. $4.47 media. If we were to change this to Ground Advantage, $5.64. Even though that still falls underneath what I collected, the label price itself is not the only fee I paid. And we've gotten into this in some other videos. Now that shipping label price is not the only fee collected by eBay. They collect the equivalent of the final value fee, and as I remember, books are up in the 15%. They also collect that on the sales tax. So if I were to actually select Ground Advantage in this case, I would be way over what I collected from the buyer to ship this item. So we will go back to media. But I like to check with media items that fall under 16 ounces. Let's print the label, and then we'll start talking about printers. Now when you set print, you'll notice that the next screen that comes up says your label is ready to print. Now if you click on print label, this screen will come up. But on this side of the screen, this is where your setup is. You'll notice destination is thermal printer. It'll print one copy in a 4x6 size, and it'll fit to the printable area. If you had a different printer connected, you would make changes. You'd click on that little drop down. Now for some resellers, this is all they want to know. They hit a button, it says print, it kicks out a label. Now here are a couple sample labels. These are your standard 4x6 thermal printer labels. You'll notice they've got a whole bunch of information on them, including the tracking number barcode, the sender's address, the recipient's address. Up here in the corner, it says it's a U.S. postage paid, and the X is a media indicator. The G, of course, is ground advantage, and if you're printing a priority label, you'll see a P. Now, you have a choice. No surcharge. You have a choice when you run this off. In addition to the weight right here and the zip code, the origin zip code, you can indicate that you want the buyer to see what you paid for the shipping label. I have that turned off in my eBay software. You'll also see the name Pitney Bowes here. For as long as I can remember, Pitney Bowes is a company contracted by eBay to deal with their shipping process. It's also the company that used to run the global shipping program for eBay, and I believe they still have the contract to do eBay International. But they're the software and label people. In addition to the eBay shipping page, which I've gone over a few times and will include a little more in this video, I keep Pirate Ship up on another tab. There are many, many other competitors like Pirate Ship. Let's call them third-party shipping apps. They negotiate a discount with the post office the same way eBay does, and they get you discounted shipping costs because, again, you're doing the work. This is a Pirate Ship page. Pirate Ship is just one of those third-party label-producing software apps. They've also negotiated a discount, like eBay, with the post office. Their claim, of course, is that they can save you 87%. Those numbers probably reflect the maximum extreme that you would pay if you went to the counter. Now, depending on how long it's been since you've been in Pirate Ship, they may have to do the login verification. Most of the websites seem to be doing that. Now, one of the interesting things about Pirate Ship is it has a direct link interface setup with platforms like eBay. Now, you have to do this initially, but after that, all you have to do is click on this, and it will import any of the items you need shipping labels for from your eBay store or your eBay account. And when you click on it, it actually puts them here on a list. Now, we don't have any right now because we've completed the shipping. If you come down here and you click on Ship, it'll give you a choice to do imports from eBay or singles. Now, singles we tend to do if we're sending a package out to a relative or a friend, or if we just came over here because eBay did something we didn't like and we have one package we intend to ship on Pirate Ship. Now, you go through this much the same way. You put in the size, you put in the weight, you tell them whether or not it's going to be a package or an envelope, that type of thing, whether you want any special things, whether you want to use media rate, and then you say input. Here's your package, here's your sizes. You come down and you say get rate, and it'll take you to a list very similar to the one on eBay. It'll show you your different carriers and your different choices. Now, one thing, Pirate Ship is not interfaced with FedEx. So if you're coming over here to ship a large package, you're going to be shipping it UPS. So your choices on this platform, USPS and UPS. And then it prints a label the same way. Now, one interesting thing about Pirate Ship, you set up the billing a little different than you do with eBay. eBay first checks to see if they can take their money right from your account, your sold items, and then maybe your bank account as a backup or a credit card. Pirate Ship goes straight to your assigned credit card. Now, some people like that because if they're using a credit card that gives them cash back or frequent flyer miles, they will put 100% of their shipping on Pirate Ship because they want to get that bump back from their credit card. I generally use eBay simply because it's faster and easier, unless there's a problem, and I've mentioned it many times. The common problem for me is that items between 15.1 ounces and 15.9 ounces end up on eBay being charged the 16-ounce rate, and I lose $1.50 every time it happens. So the reason I keep those two tabs open, I jump over to Pirate Ship in such situations. I also do it sometimes if the addressing software, the buyer's address information, doesn't look quite right in eBay. I'll go over, and Pirate Ship seems to be more tolerant of addressing issues. You need something in the way of a phone or a laptop or an iPad, something that you can see the shipping page on. And then that, of course, has to interface with a printer to print the label. Some people like wireless printers. Rose uses the wireless printer that we have next to my desk, the laser, with her phone, because she can sit in her reclining office, punch a few numbers, and the laser printer spits out without a cable. For my shipping printers, for my dedicated label printers, I opted for wired, those that have a cable. I find them to have fewer issues. I don't have to worry about whether the gremlins are working the airways between the devices, but wireless is an option for most of the companies that sell printers. All right, so what companies sell printers? I'm going to go back to a story about my very first home computers. Choices back then were Apple and IBM. Right? IBM was the dominant force in the DOS-based computers, and Apple, of course, was the alternative for those who were progressive, young, and looking for something different. We ended up with an Apple for our first home computer simply because it had a better interface for children. We didn't have to teach the kids DOS. But I digress. Along with those computers, as soon as the market became prolific for people buying computers to put in their homes, the IBM computers especially, every company who could manufacture electronics started producing what we called IBM clones. They had different names on them. Sometimes you couldn't even recognize the names, but they all functioned much like the IBM. What did they have going for them? They were all cheaper than the IBM. But cheaper doesn't always equate to longevity, minimum maintenance, or not having issues. If you had an IBM computer and you paid up for it, you could get it serviced. Just about every town was developing and standing up computer repair networks. You know, you could take your IBM in and they could probably get you parts for it. When you looked at those clones, sometimes there were issues because some of those were made so cheaply that it was kind of the throwaway environment. And printers are much along the same lines. This morning before I came out here, just for kicks, I Googled top 10 label printers for 2026. Now, of course, Rollo was at the top of the list. For top-rated thermal shipping label printers on YouTube or Google, produces quite a bit of information on the topic. Interestingly enough, many of the content creators have different opinions because they're using different criteria to judge, and we're no different. Dymo wasn't even on the list, but Zebra was. The very first of the modern label printers I saw and used happened to be Zebras. They were big. They were bigger than a man's shoebox for a pair of boots. They were commercial models, and they were designed for longevity, speed, volume. You know, it was like the idea if you're running a business like Amazon, you're going to have printers that just day in and day out spit out thousands of labels. Well, most of us who are running eBay businesses do not need that type of printer. We don't need to invest that kind of money in it. So when I went looking, the two prominent brands were Dymo and Rollo. Now the Rollos are a bit more rounded, the Dymos are small and square. Rollo I liked, just as popular. You know, this usually starts an argument. Should I buy a Dymo? Should I buy a Rollo? My point of view is you can buy whatever brand does the job for you within your budget. But the goal is serviceability, good instructions to set it up, cheap labels to print, stay away from proprietary, and to interface with your computers. Other than that, I'm not brand specific. And my search this morning, it produced names I'd never heard of under the top 10. K-Noun, that's K-N-A-O-N, Nelco, Fomemo, Force. Those were all printers. And they all looked just like my Rollo. And they were all cheaper than my Rollo. Because that's the thing about clones. When they produce them and roll them out, they can roll them out fast, cheaper, and usually foreign. I've got no problem. Most of the printers coming in are going to be foreign. You know, be American, buy American. Well, America has to produce competitive items. Doesn't matter. If you buy an off-brand printer, and some of them were as cheap as $30, it will get you in the game. You can find out whether a dedicated label printer works in with your business model. But as you're doing it, find out a few factors. Make sure it prints the labels in the size you need. Typically for shipping out on eBay, that's a 4x6. See if it has the drivers that interface with your laptop. When I bought my first Rollo, I was using older Macs. The Rollo did not plug and play. I had to actually call Rollo, and they had to get me to a website where I could download the driver. That's that little piece of software that interfaces with your device. But once they set it up, once they got me there and I downloaded it and we went through the setup, I haven't had a problem since. Now, when I bought my second Rollo, same thing. I had to go out and get a driver. I'd changed the version of the Mac, but Mac still was not including the Rollo driver embedded in the Mac. So you may have an issue with connectivity, especially if you buy one of these clones, these off-brands. But if they have a service center and you can call and you can get support, which is one of those critical questions, there shouldn't be a problem with it. Now, to continue our discussion on printers, I've come into my packing bench area because it is primarily where I print my labels, at least my eBay labels. We tend to print the labels for the auctions. When we run an auction of our own on Ninja, we tend to print those in on the dining room table. This is the printer that goes on the dining room table. This is printer number 2. Printer number 1, it's behind me, hooked up to my MacBook that I use for shipping. Now out here in my packing area, I've got my Mac, my oldest Mac, on a rolling cart. And underneath it is my laser printer, my multifunction laser printer. And I have a nearly identical Brother printer in my office next to my other laptop. Now, laser printers are good for certain things, but as soon as you can, I recommend shifting over to some form of a label printer. Well, Purple Monkey, what's your favorite printer? Anything in a thermal. Anything in a thermal for shipping labels, that's a great answer. Because laser printers with their cartridges and inkjet printers with their different toner packs are even more expensive to print your labels. They do a good job, they'll certainly get you by, but they also, unless you load specific paper, they do not come with peel and stick labels. So you're committing yourself to taping on, cutting out and taping on every label you print. But I did it that way for many, many years. Now, here's Pirate Ship up on my laptop, and over there you can see my label printer. This little setup is compact and allows me to work out here at the packing table. Now, we're going to be talking a little bit about Pirate Ship because it is an alternative to using the eBay shipping page. And in certain situations, I prefer it. I keep both tabs open right here on my Mac so I can alternate between them and check prices. Now, this is a standard Rollo printer. I happen to have 2 of these, and you can see that one is marked number 2 and the other, of course, number 1. This printer, which was the second one I purchased, normally resides in the house, and it's not hooked to anything until we need it. Generally, that need is to send out packages after we run one of our own auctions. Unhooking printer number 1 and taking it in the house, which is where I normally set Rose up to type the addresses in for our buyers on the Auction Ninja platform. This is not an endorsement for Rollo specifically. In fact, part of this conversation will talk about other brands, competitors, and the advantages and disadvantages of different brands. Now, generally, they're all going to use the same type of labels, but labels come in different quality. Labels come from different places. I normally just go on eBay and buy my labels, and they come in like 500s or 1,000 or 5,000. And I caution you initially about buying 5,000 pack counts. Pay a little more per label, buy a smaller amount, get the process down, make sure you like the printer, and then look for value. Initially, look for something that you know is a good quality, new, because some sellers on eBay will sell you old UPS labels. In fact, my last batch fell into that. I paid probably less than I ever had before but that can be a factor. And you can go on eBay and Amazon and you can just buy your thermal printer labels. Typically $10 to $20 per 500 and cheaper in quantity. There are very few controls and buttons on a printer like this. This is what it looks like. And all you do is you take your fan folded labels and you take good face up, you line them up with the front edge of the printer, is right about there as you close it. As an alternative, they offer you spools, rolls of labels, but then you typically have to either get a holder or mount something on the wall so that the labels will feed in without jamming. Occasionally you will get these to fold in properly, and they'll try to send 2 or 3 labels through the machine at once. When that happens, this light will go to red and you simply have to clear the jam. It happens on occasion. Now this happens to be a sold item that was shipped out a few weeks ago. But I've gone ahead and called it back up because I wanted to mention that if something goes wrong when you're printing your labels, you can reprint them. But there's a bit of a hazard to doing that. You have to make sure that you're reprinting the original label rather than buying a new label, because the last thing you want to do is pay the carrier twice to ship the same package. So what you do is you simply go to the sold page or go to one of the pages where the item is indicated and you say, get another label. When you do that, the item reappears and you've got a clean screen, or at least a semi-clean screen. Now you'll notice that originally when it opened, all these numbers are either zeros or ones. It's because we use flat rate shipping and I don't put the numbers in. If I put in weight and dimensions on the listing template when I listed the item, those would be the starting point for this ship. But instead you simply back over what's here and you put in the new data, and then when you come down we're gonna fake some data here. We're going to say this is 14 by 6 by 4, and we're going to say it weighs 2 pounds, 2 ounces. And when we hit return, it comes up with an amount. You'll see it right here. Now we charged $12.79 to ship this item originally back when we did it. It went up as standard shipping. Now you'll notice that right here, standard shipping, $12.79. Now standard shipping is available to us as a flat rate user because it allows us to pick the carrier after we have sold the item. We can use the destination zip code to decide on those marginal areas which one is more efficient to get it out to them. UPS, FedEx, or the post office. We don't have to pre-choose. If you're using calculated shipping, that option is not available to you, and you have to decide ahead of time. So when items are going to be bigger or heavier, I like to use standard shipping. The rest of the time, except for media, we use ground advantage. You can see it here. But you'll notice your original choice in the template comes up. Some other choices in the same category of service come up. But if you come down here and you click on all, it gives you all the USPS, UPS, and FedEx choices. And it's that easy to do a comparison. Now you'll notice that this item would have cost me $12.07 if I'd have shipped it ground advantage. If I shipped it priority, it would be $16.99. If I used FedEx home delivery, it would be just under $20. UPS services go up from there. UPS ground, $14.84. So in this case, there's a $5 difference between UPS and FedEx. Even though both UPS and FedEx have been criticized in the last year or two for the fact that the number you see on this screen doesn't end up being the final charge. They up-bill you once you've already trusted them to deliver the package. Many sellers don't even notice it because it's simply charged through eBay. But in this case, the best and cheapest way is $12.07 for ground advantage. It has the added advantage of being able to be picked up curbside. And that is the way I actually shipped this one out a couple weeks ago. Here you can see on printer number 1, which stays out here at the packing bench, the green light is lit, meaning it powered up properly. And if you press it, it kicks out. When you turn it off, the green light goes out. That simple. The on-off switch, of course, is in the back, which is a little bit inconvenient, but most people, I think, just turn these on in the morning and leave them on all day. Now, these are your guideposts. And what this indicates, of course, is that you can use different size label paper. You can print different labels other than just a 4x6 shipping label on some of these printers. Now, once we close it down and latch it, hear the click. If we turn it over on its side, this is the release that opens the unit to feed the paper. This is not the power button. The power button is back here. This is where your plug-in adapter goes for power. This is because it's a wired printer. This is not the wireless model. Most companies these days make wireless models, but unless portability is your biggest concern, I do not recommend one because it's just one more thing to go wrong. A cord plugs in here and it runs over and plugs into the laptop. I'll show you that on the laptop. Now, here's the cable that comes from the printer. Because this printer was purchased back when USB was the standard for a Mac laptop, it has a standard USB. My newest Mac, those have USB-Cs, hence this adapter with the indicator. But that's all it takes, and you can get these online. You get 3 or 4 of them for just a couple of bucks, and they adapt the larger USB to the smaller USB-C. This button, once on, is your paper advance. If you want to run a test paper, if you want to run a test label, you press this button once it's powered up. There's nothing more of a nuisance than starting a run of printers and having the printing run over onto the next label. And if it does that, it means you haven't started your first edge correctly. But these simply peel off. Once you use them, you peel them and stick them onto the packages. Now, having said that, if your labels are old or they've overwintered in an unheated space, it could very well be that you will have to put some additional tape on because the adhesive backer is not all that strong. When these come in quantity, and like I say, usually I buy them several thousand at a time, and I just store them in a clear small tote, put the lid on, put it underneath the bench at the packing bench. It keeps the moisture and the air away from the labels until you're ready to use them. Then I just pull out a few inches in a stack, tear it off, and put it back behind the printer and reload the printer. It's a pretty simple process compared to some machines I've loaded over the years. You can buy a cheap inkjet printer and end up paying a tremendous amount of money to buy the correct ink cartridges for that printer. So the money can be spent in labels or ink if you're using ink printers. Now with thermals, they don't use ink, but there may be maintainable parts. So if you think you're going to need a cleaning kit or you're going to need some kind of an element to replace eventually, you may want to look at what those things cost before you make your decision. And this is where the Dymo question came in when I was first searching for a printer. I would not advise ever buying a printer that needs proprietary, meaning they only come from the original manufacturer, proprietary parts or label. Dymo has been trending towards using labels that they provide because there's a huge market. Like I say, the 4XL, I think it was, that it had a notch in the rolls. So if your label pack did not have the physical shape needed to fit in the Dymo, it wouldn't run those labels. Then when they came on with their 5 series or 5000 series, which included some wireless ones, they actually put an RF chip inside the labels. So if your label pack wouldn't talk and communicate with your label printer, you couldn't print labels. With Dymo, it's the labels. It increases costs, and those costs are hidden from you when you're shopping. I like label printers where you can shop around. And this reminds me of years ago when I first got into buying propane tanks for the houses I was building. If you bought a propane tank of your own, you could shop around just like you can pull into any gas station for your car and you can put the cheapest gas available in your car. With your propane tank, your LP tank, if you owned it outright, you could call any supplier of propane and they would come by and their truck would fill up your tank and you could take advantage. If you leased your propane tank, The gas had to come from the same company that provided the lease, and they could set the price. And that's why I've always been against proprietary accessories and consumables. And in some cases, not using manufacturer-provided labels and accessories can void your warranty. Now, if the prices come down to the point where it's almost a throwaway, I'll use it till it fails and I'll get another one, then such things don't matter as much. Or if you've got a source to get those labels cheaper, even if they are proprietary. But the concept seems much more straightforward: to buy a relatively inexpensive printer, new or used, use it, use non-proprietary labels until you find out if you like it. And then maybe go looking for a better quality one. If it doesn't run as long or as many months or years as you think it should, then you can go ahead and do it. I had that feeling recently with my microwave. I installed it in the kitchen. It only lasted a few years. A part broke. My personal view is things like printers and small appliances should give you a much longer service life than a few years. And that's where life cycle maintenance comes in. Look at the entire cost for the duration annually, every 4 years, every 10 years. Think about how long that device should last and what it's going to cost you to operate it at the rate you intend to for that life cycle. Because it doesn't matter if the printer cost is cheap if you're paying through the nose every time you buy labels. So look at the total cost of operating that. And then look at the total cost of something like printing your labels with an inkjet or a laser machine, because you will find that any of the label printers are much cheaper to operate than running, say, an inkjet. I was always impressed by how quickly I went through inkjet cartridges back when I did that. Today of label printers on Google and YouTube turned up all sorts of information. There are a lot of brands out there. Here you can see the common comparison between Dymo and Rollo style. But it's not just about those two brands anymore. There are a lot of other brands. You can see that Dymo was at the top of the list for 2025. And when I checked the list for 2026, I didn't see it. Could be that proprietary thing. Now here's one that offers color printing. And why is that important? They're using them to print labels for products. They're using them to print thank you notes. They're using them to print other than shipping labels. So it does help if you can identify what you want out of a printer before you go looking, because some can be eliminated immediately if they only print in one size, won't do round labels, only print on 4x6s or in black and white. Now, asking your printer to do more than just shipping labels, to make product labels, round labels, takes me back to my comment about dedicated printers that use inexpensive supplies. You wouldn't want to run your label off on a printer that costs more to stock the ink or the heat, or be difficult to change among the sizes and available shapes of the labels. You'd still want to set your shipping label up as a dedicated, and you'd want to print with inexpensive labels from an inexpensive printer, and save the fancier printer that's making things like this and this. It's very likely that it's going to be more expensive to operate. And that's where research comes in. Research the printer, research the available products that can run through it, research its capabilities, and if a versatile one-size-fits-all solution works for you, then go that route. If not, stick to a dedicated label printer and then run a more expensive printer to run the copies off of those color thank you cards and other items. Messages I like to see in my inbox in the morning. I have my interface, my admin interface with eBay set up to notify me every time I have a sale by sending a message into my inbox. And I use these messages to make my pull list in the morning. I find every one of them where it says that something in the 3 stores is sold, and I add it to a paper list next to my laptop in the house. Then I pull those items and bring them to the packing bench. But this is not where I go to print the shipping label. I actually get to the shipping label page by going through the hub once for each of the 3 stores, and it actually takes me to the area where the sold items reside in list form. So here's the seller hub. If I had additional new solds, I've already finished my packing for the day, it would actually show me right here items to ship. And that would take me, if I clicked on it, to a list of items that had to go out today or tomorrow. And that will take us to our shipping page, our shipping label page on the eBay platform. I've showed you this page many times. It's where you put in the size and the weight of the package. You take a look at what you put in the listing originally for the rate of shipping. This happens to be a media item. What you collected appears at the bottom, and then you pick your service. I've pulled a couple of interesting items that I'll be packing and shipping in a few minutes. I'll be packing them today. They'll go out tomorrow, but they caught my attention. This one's an old reference manual for a Tandy computer. Now, if you're old enough, you probably remember those. Tandy, as I remember, is a Radio Shack brand. So along with some of the other early personal or home computers, Radio Shack was in the market. Learn Basic for Tandy computers. Yeah, learning software. There's still a market for some of these old reference manuals. In the box I pulled this one from. I had some for old hard drives and Commodores and some of the other old computers. I got a group in from an estate, and I check them out. I take a look at whether there's still any market for them at all, and I put them up as singles or groups. Now here's another item that came in from an estate. This is a little jig. It doesn't look like much. It's got a hole in it over here. It's got a thumb screw, and it's a little Teflon triangle, if you will. It's a sharpening jig. Again, sharpening, whether it be for drill bits or knives, sharpening jigs can have value. Now this item, which is making noise in the background, these are stainless steel barbed tees for hoses. What's interesting about them, of course, is that I have them in quantity and that they're stainless. A lot of them these days, they're plastic or they're made out of metal that will rust. But for certain applications like marine boats, for medical devices, you may want it in stainless. So rather than deal with these and figure out the sizes, I just put them up as one group. Now, interestingly enough, these weigh 1.02 pounds. Yeah, that's going to ship at a 2-pound rate. And I was taking a look at the listing because this is old enough that I wondered whether it still said priority. It would have been set up initially to go out in a padded flat rate envelope being over 1 pound. But I only keep a few of these around anymore because I occasionally find a situation where it is still cheaper to send it out in a priority flat rate than ground advantage. If it's very heavy but small, they still work sometimes. But in this case, it would have simply been set up back when the price to send a priority flat rate envelope was just under $9.79. I converted to ground advantage, but I left the price at $9.79. And now the USPS prices for ground have probably climbed enough that should fall right into the sweet spot of making me enough money to cover the shipping, and I shift an old listing. All right, time to get these packed. And there are those 3 items packed up. The book is headed to Arizona, $14.79. I don't think there was an offer to buyer, but it went out media, and that's a good point, because if you're going to hold old reference text like a Tandy computer book, you're going to have space, and you're going to still want to be able to ship it out using something like media rate. Shipped out at under $6, so it still made that a viable item. Now here, this is a sharpening jig for a grinder. It's headed to Oklahoma. So yeah, it went out in a bubble after being wrapped in some additional bubble. Here, this is the just over 1 pound of stainless barbed tees. It's headed to Texas, so we'll get it out. Yeah, I hated having to pay a 2-pound rate. But it was in the Ziploc. I added a little bubble, slipped it inside a bubble mailer. It'd be hard to really damage these en route. If I thought if they were the plastic ones, I would have probably put them in a box. But that's what I wanted to show you today. As always, we're down here at the packing bench sending out items. So today we've been talking about shipping labels and printers. In the last couple of videos we talked about shipping policies and practices. If you want to see some packing videos, which of course is a related topic, go to our playlist and you'll find several on the playlist under packing and shipping, because I like to make packing videos. Whenever I get something a little unusual, something new, I try to grab my camera and make a video. Over length, awkward sizes, heavy, the different carriers, they make a good topic for videos. This is Brian. I'm at the lake this morning. It's sunny out, you can see. The sun's been chasing me around the yard today. So for my viewer, the Jedi, I hope this helped you. If you have any additional questions, please send them. And for the rest of you, thank you for watching the video.